Good afternoon, my dear listeners. Welcome to Rupkatha Shamoita Rupkathara in this YouTube channel. Sorry, today I am late. I am actually suffering. My health is not well today. That's why I am a bit late today. So let's start without any delay. Further delay till now, what we have read in this series, the folk tales of Bengal. Here we are reading from the last week till now the second story. The name of that second story is Fakir Chand. And how far we came along till now we have seen how the two friends, one of them was a king's son, got married with a very beautiful princess who were residing in the water world. And from there there was only one possible method or mechanism to access that water world, that was by the virtue of Nagmani or the serpent jewel. But by some circumstances that princess water princess sorry the bride of that prince was got caught by another prince or by another king. And now the friend of that princess, that means the mantri putra or the son of the minister, and now he has taken the disguise of Fakir Chand, and he somehow managed to infiltrate the security guard, and he had reached to the princess. He had reached or he had gained the access of Princess Mahal. And now we will start to read the next part. When all in the palace had retired to rest, the supposed fakir, coming towards the princess, said in his own usual voice, "Princess, do you not recognize me? I am the minister's son, the friend of your princely husband." The princess, astonished at the announcement, said, "Who? The minister's son? Oh, my husband's best friend, do rescue me from this terrible captivity, from this worse than death. Oh, fate! It is by my own fault that I am reduced to this with wretched state. Oh, rescue me, thou best of the friends." She then burst into tears. The minister's son said, "Do not be disconsolate. I will try my best to rescue you this very night. Only you must do whatever I tell you." "I will do anything you tell me, minister's son. Anything you tell me." After this, the supposed fakir left the room and passed through the courtyard of the palace. Some of the guards challenged him, to whom he replied, I will just go out for a minute and again come in presently." They understood that it was the madcap fakir. True to his word, he did come back shortly and went to the princess. An hour afterwards, he again went out and was again challenged, on which he made the same reply as at the first time. The guards who challenged him began to mutter between their teeth, "This madcap of a fakir will this madcap of a fakir will we suppose go out and come in all night. Let the fellow alone. Let him do what he likes. Who can be sitting up all the night for him?" The minister's son was going out and coming in with the view of accustoming the guards to his constant egress and ingress, and also of watching for a favorable opportunity to escape with the princess. About 3 o'clock in the morning, the minister's son again passed through the courtyard, but this time no one challenged him, as all the guards had fallen asleep. Overjoyed at the auspicious circumstance, he went to the princess. "Now, princess, is the time for escape. The guards are all asleep. Mount on, mount on my back and tie the locks of your hair round my neck and keep tight hold of me. The princess did as she was told. He passed unchallenged through the courtyard with the lovely burden of his back, passed out of the gate of the palace, no one challenging him, passed onto the outskirts of the city and reached the tank from which the princess had risen. The princess stood on her legs, rejoicing at her escape and at the same time trembling. The minister's son untied the snake jewel from his waistcloth and descending into the waters, both he and she found their way to the subterranean palace. The reception which the prince in the Subaqua's palace gave to his wife and his friend may be easily imagined. He had nearly died of grief, but now he suffered a resurrection. The three were now mad with joy. During the 3 days that they remained in the palace, they again and again told the story of the grace of the princess into the upper world, of her seizure, of her captivity in the palace, preparations of for the preparations for marriage of the old woman, of the minister's son personating Fakir Chand, and of the successful deliverance. It is necessary to add that the prince and the princess expressed their gratitude to the minister's son in the warmest terms, declared him to be their best and greatest friend, and vowed to abide always till the day of their death by his advice and to follow his counsel. Being resolved to return to their native country, the king's son, the minister's son, and the princess left the subterranean palace and lightened in the passage by the snake jewel, made their way good to the upper world. As they had neither elephants nor horses, they were under the necessity of travelling on foot. And though this mode of travelling was troublesome to both the king's son and the minister's son, as they were bred in the lap of luxury, it was infinitely more troublesome to the princess, as the stones of the rough road wounded the invisible palms of her tender feet. Where'er they fell, wounded the invisible palms of her tender feet wherever they fell. When her feet became very sore, the king's son sometimes took her up on his broad shoulders, on which she sat astride, but the load, however lovely, was too heavy to be carried any great distance. She therefore, for the most part, travelled on foot. One evening, they bivouacated beneath a tree. As no human habitations were visible, the minister's son said to the prince and princess, "Both of you go to sleep, and I will keep watch in order to prevent any danger." The royal couple were soon locked in the arms of sleep. The faithful son of the minister did not sleep, but sat up watching. It so happened that on the tree swung the nest of the two immortal birds, Bihangama and Bihangami. The Bengali name of these two birds are Bangoma and Bangomi, who were not only endowed with the power of human speech, but who could see into the future. To the no little astonishment of the minister's son, the two prophetical birds joined in the following conversation. Bihangama or the Bangoma. The minister's son has already risked his own life for the safety of his friend, the king's son, but he will find it difficult to save the prince at last. Why so? Many dangers await the king's son. The prince's father, when he hears of the approach of his son, will send for him an elephant, some horses, and attendants. When the king's son rides on the elephant, he will fall down and die. But suppose someone prevents the king's son from riding on the elephant and makes him ride on horseback, will he not in that case be saved? Yes, he will. In that case, escape the danger, but a fresh danger awaits him. When the king's son is in sight of his father's palace, and when he is in the act of passing through its lion gate, the lion gate will fall upon him and crush him to death. Then Bihangami or Bangomi said, but suppose someone destroys the lion's gate before the king's son goes up to it, will not that king's son in that case be saved? Yes, in that case he will escape that particular danger, but a fresh danger awaits him. When the king's son reaches the palace and sits at a feast prepared for him, and when he takes into his mouth the head of a fish cooked for him, the death of the fish will cook for him. The head of the fish will stick in his throat and choke him to death. But suppose someone sitting at the feast snatches the head of the fish from the prince's plate and thus prevents him from putting it into his mouth, will not the king's son in that case be saved? Yes, in that case, he will escape that particular danger, but a fresh danger awaits him. When the prince and the princess, after dinner, retire into their sleeping apartment and they lie together in bed, a terrible cobra will come into the room and bite the king's son to death. But suppose someone lying in wait in the room, cut the snake into pieces. Will not that king's son in that case be saved? Yes, in that case, the life of the king's son will be saved. But if the man who kills the snake repeats to the king's son the conversation between you and me, that man will be turned into a marble statue. But is there no means of restoring the marble statue to life? Yes, the marble statue may be restored to life if it is washed with the life blood of the infant which the princess will give birth to immediately after it is ushered into the world. The conversation of the prophetical birds had extended thus far when uh, the conversation of the prophetical birds had extended thus far when the crows began to caw. The east put on a reddish hue, and the travelers beneath the tree bestirred themselves. The conversation stopped, but the minister's son had heard it all. The princess, and the minister's son pursued their journey in the morning, but they had not walked many hours when they met a procession consisting of an elephant, a horse, a palki, and a large number of attendants. These animals and men had been sent by the king, who had heard that his son, together with his newly married wife and his friend the minister's son, were not far from the capital on their journey homewards. The elephant, which was richly caparisoned, caparisoned, was intended for the prince. The palki, the framework of which was silver and was gaudily adorned, was meant for the princess, and the horse for the minister's son. As the prince was about to mount on the elephant, the minister's son went up to him and said, "Allow me to ride on the elephant, and you please ride on horseback." The prince was not a little surprised at the coolness of the proposal, he thought his friend was presuming too much on the services he had ranged. He was therefore nettled, but remembering that his friend had saved both him and his wife, he said nothing but quietly mounted the horse, though his mind became somewhat alienated from him. The procession started, and after some time came in sight of the palace, the lion gate of which had been gaily adorned for the reception of the prince and the princess. The minister's son told the prince that the lion gate should be broken down before the prince could enter the palace. The prince was astounded at the proposal, especially as the minister's son gave no reasons for so extraordinary a request. His mind became still more estranged from him, but in consideration of the services the minister's son had rendered, his request was complied with, and the beautiful lion gate with its gay decorations was broken down. The pretty the party now went into the palace, where the king gave a warm reception to his son, to his daughter-in-law, and the minister's son. When the story of their adventures was related, the king and his courtiers expressed great astonishment, and they all with one voice extolled the sagacity, prudence, and devotedness of the minister's son. The ladies of the palace were struck with the extraordinary beauty of the newcomer. Her complexion was milk and vermilion mixed together. Vermilion is a red tinged powder which is usually put on the put on put on put on as a bindi or as a sindoor or on the forehead by married women in India. So vermilion mixed together. Her neck was like that of a swan. Her eyes were like those of a gazelle. Her lips were as red as the berry bimba. Her cheeks were lovely. Her nose was straight and high. Her hair reached her ankles. Her walk was as graceful as that of a young elephant. Such were the terms in which the connoisseurs of beauty connoisseurs of beauty praised the princess whom destiny had brought into the midst of them. They sat around her and put her 1,000 questions regarding her parents, regarding the subterranean palace in which she formerly lived, and the serpent which had killed all her relatives. It was now time that the new arrivals should have their dinner. The dinner was served up in dishes of gold. All sorts of delicacies were there, amongst which the most conspicuous was the large head of a rohita fish, placed in a golden cup near the prince's plate. While they were eating, the minister's son suddenly snatched the head of the fish from the prince's plate and said, Let me, he prince, eat this Rohita's head. The king's son was quite indignant, quite indignant. He said nothing, however. The minister's son perceived that his friend was in a terrible rage, but he could not help it, as his conduct, however strange, was necessary to the safety of his friend's life. Neither could he clear himself by stating the reason of his behavior, as in that case he himself would be transformed into a marble statue. The dinner over, the minister's son expressed his desire to go to his own house. At other times, the king's son would not allow his friend to go away in that fashion, but being shocked at his strange conduct, he readily agreed to the proposal. The minister's son, however, had not the slightest notion of going to his own house. He was resolved to avert the last peril that was to threaten the life of his friend. Accordingly, with a sword in his hand, he stealthily entered the room in which the prince and the princess were to sleep that night, and ensconced himself under the bed, uh, bed, bed seat, bedstead, under the bedstead, which was furnished with mattresses of down and canopied with mosquito curtains of the richest silk and gold lace. Soon after dinner, the prince and princess came into the bedroom and, undressing themselves, went to bed. At midnight, while the royal couple were asleep, the minister's son perceived a snake of gigantic size enter the room through one of the passages and climbed up the tester frame of the bed. He rushed out of his hiding place, killed the serpent, cut it upon in pieces, and put the pieces in the dish for holding bitter leaves and spices. It so happened, however, that at the minister's son was as the minister's son was cutting the serpent into pieces, a drop of blood fell on the breast of the princess, and the rather at the mosquito curtain had not been let down. Thinking that the drop of blood might injure the fair princess, he resolved to lick it up. But as he regarded it as a great sin to look up a young woman lying asleep half naked, he blindfolded himself with a sevenfold cloth and licked up the drop of blood. But while he was in the act of licking it, the princess awoke and screamed, and her scream roused her husband lying beside her. The prince, seeing the minister's son, who he thought had gone away to his own house, bending over the body of his wife, fell into a great rage and would have got up and killed him, had not the minister's son besought him to restrain his anger, adding, "Friend, I have done this only in order to save your life." "I do not understand what you mean," said the prince. "Ever since we came out of the subterranean palace, you have been behaving in a most extraordinary way. In the first place, you prevented me from getting upon the richly caparisoned elephant, though my father the king had purposely sent it for me. I thought, however, that a sense of the service you had rendered to me had made you exceedingly vain. I therefore let the matter pass and mounted the horse. In the second place, you insisted on the destruction of the fine lion gate which my father had adorned with gay decorations, and I let that matter also pass. Then again at dinner you snatched away in a most shameful manner the Rohita's head, which was on my plate, and devoured it yourself, thinking, no doubt, that you were entitled to higher honors than I. You then pretended that you were going home, for which I was not at all sorry, as you had made yourself very disagreeable to me, and now you are actually in my bedroom bending over the naked bosom of my wife. You must have had some evil design, and you pretend that you have done this to save my life. I fancy it was not for saving my life, but for destroying my wife's chastity. Oh, do not harbor such thoughts in your mind against me. The gods know that I have done all this for the preservation of your life. You would see the reasonable you would see the reasonableness of my conduct throughout if I had the liberty of stating my reasons. And why are you not at liberty? Asked the prince. Who has shut up your mouth? It is destiny that has shut up my mouth, answered the minister's son. If I were to tell it all, I should be transformed into a marble statue. You would be transformed into a marble statue, exclaimed the prince. You must take me to the simpleton to believe this nonsense. Simpleton to believe this nonsense. Do you wish me, then, friend? Said the minister's son. To tell you all, you must then make up your mind to see your friend turned into stone. Come out with it, said the prince, or else you are a dead man. The minister's son, in order to clear himself of the foul accusation brought against him, deemed it his duty to reveal the secret at the risk of his life. So, my dear friends, I am resting this story up to this. We will read again tomorrow to the next part of this story. Until then, see you. Bye bye.